ICQ Podcast, episode 433, Beginner's Fault Finding. Well, hello and welcome, fellow amateur radio enthusiasts, to episode 433 of your ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported this episode by Philip Heckingham, VK6 Alpha Delta Foxtrot, and of course our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode we join Martin M1MRB, Chris Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Bill Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOA, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is Beginner's Fault Finding. Well, as always, it's your very kind donations that keep us advert-free on your ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, and as I say, keep our independent thoughts and your feelings of our hobby flowing away. So Phil, the VK6 Alpha Delta Foxtrot, Phil's very active on the ICQ Podcast digital group. You've probably heard him now, and he's always very early because he knows that July is the ICQ birthday month. So he's sent along a birthday donation for the ICQ Podcast, and say thanks all the team for the show, and say obviously thanking the presenters and everyone that takes part in the show. So thank you, Phil, for your very kind generosity, and say keeping your show advert free and produced for every fortnight along the way. Now, as mentioned, July is our birthday month. It's a great opportunity to get involved and show your support for the show. It really does, fill in the gaps for us in terms of our funding for the year. So please do consider visiting our donation page at icqpodcast.com/donate. We've actually changed the donation button there recently as well, so it's a lot easier to make donations, either monthly, annually, or one-off to whatever value you wish. So, a nice, easy way now getting involved on that fair for you. Right, well, now we're going to move on with our show in this episode. We're going to join Martin, Chris, Bill, and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including shortwave listening still popular in Canada and Queens of the Mountain. As always, hope you enjoy.
The ICQ Podcast. Come for a moment. Stay for an hour.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 433 of the ICQ Podcast News Roundtable. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH. Hi, Chris.
Very good evening, Martin. This very warm south of England evening. It's certainly summer's here, isn't it?
It is suddenly become summer. It's about as warm as it was in the States about a month ago, but
it is true.
It's suddenly got very warm in the UK, which is quite nice. Moving over to the States, we got Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Hi, Bill.
Good evening, Martin. Good evening, everybody.
And good to hear you. As I say, enjoyed my time with you guys in the States, and as I say, that was a good one. Back into the UK, we have Mr. Leslie Butterfields, G0CIB. Hi, Leslie.
Good evening, Martin, from the depths of East London. Oh, my God, it's been an absolute scorcher here. Absolute scorcher, and I'm sweltering at the moment with plenty of orange juice. Over to you.
All right, that sounds like a good one. It's quite hot in South London at the moment as well. Right, unfortunately, Frank, Mr. Frank Hell, K4FMH, can't join us tonight. He gave me a short note and said, I can tell you now, but it said, I'm recovering from robotic prostate cancer surgery at the Mayo Clinic and will be unable to participate today. Frank, get well soon. I know we've corresponded a lot over the last 4 or 5 weeks, but get well soon, Frank. We want you back, obviously. And unfortunately, Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, unfortunately, he can't join us tonight due to a family reason. So there's a short team tonight, but I'm sure we'll make it lively, or at least the last news story will. Hi.
You can't possibly comment, Martin.
You can't, no. One last thing, and I'm going to do it on the show here. I'm going to wish Mr. Scott McDonald from Chicago, Mr. Scott McDonald, KA9P, who we stayed with in Chicago. I'm going to wish you a happy birthday, Scott. You're a little bit younger than me, but you're
Happy
catching me up.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy
Yeah.
birthday, Scott.
Happy birthday, Scores.
Yeah, that's a good one, Scott. Right, let's move on. First news story. The ARRL Teachers Institute kicks off its summer cohorts. Bill, this is a US story, as most of them are, unfortunately. Do you want to go first on this one?
They're kicking off the summer in-person teacher institutes. This has been going on, I think, since 2004, so this is probably the 20th year. They probably skipped over COVID, I don't remember, but they bring folks up to Newington. They do it looks like some of them are week-long classes, some are 4 days, depending what level it is. But they're basically training teachers on how to use radio topics in their classrooms. So the first class talks about wireless technologies and electronics and amateur radio. The second one goes further and talks about things like remote sensing and other, telemetry downloads from various data instruments and that kind of stuff. It's just the idea that it's giving teachers another tool in their tool bag so they can talk about these science, education looks like most of these are, I think all of these are K through 12 situations. So at least they're giving folks that are teaching out there in the classroom some tools to use. And it's all donations based. So you have to pay $100 to enroll. And then all the other costs are covered by donations from that donate to this, which is mostly amateur radio folks that get the news information from the ARRL. But, I don't recall how well this is going, but the fact that they're running it every year, it must be successful. I believe, if I recall, Neil Rapp was in this not too terribly long ago, and some other folks that I know. And it's a really nice program. And it's a way to help out with giving folks some alternative ways of teaching science, especially using radio. Maybe some students will get interested in amateur radio then.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting one. I'd like to know personally a bit more about this because I think it's interesting. I'd like to know how successful it was, and maybe I can find out at some point in time by asking the right people. But Leslie, I'm thinking this could be a possibility to do something worldwide or in the UK even.
Yes. If you get a teacher that's really enthusiastic and enthused with their subject, the pupils benefit enormously, and the school reputation goes up in terms of STEM. The reputation goes through the roof. So as an idea, and I've seen this in QST before, I think it's absolutely great. In the UK, there are safeguarding issues, and I think it would be best to get the RSGB involved because they have policies on how this type of thing should be handled. So that's my views. Overall, I think it's a great idea. And if it gets more people into the hobby, that's even better.
Yeah, well, I agree with what you just said. Safeguarding rules, we're talking about teachers, so we're not talking about young people as such.
Absolutely.
And secondly, and I'm sorry, guys, at the RSGB, if this was to happen in the UK, you are the right people to set this up. And it's not me doing it, it's your problem, or you should do. We work with you, but in fairness, this would have to be somebody like the ARRL, the WIA, or the RSGB, the main organizer in the country to do this, just for credibility. What do you think, Chris?
I think it's obviously very successful if it's been going on for so long, as Bill was saying. I'm a bit surprised at this kind of way it's done, in that it's done in person. And I guess there might be reasons for that. If they're doing on, practical things that involve hands-on stuff, there maybe no other way of doing it. I applaud the ARRL for helping to embed amateur radio into education, and I know that teachers STEM is an important set of subjects for schools and children to learn about, and amateur radio is certainly a great vehicle to teach some of those lessons. But yeah, in terms of scalability, obviously, with it being in person, I guess they could only involve a very small number of people every year, which is a bit of a shame. And I was wondering whether there are ways that could be done to make this a bit more scalable, perhaps do like online training webinars, perhaps training volunteers to take this out to the various regions. Obviously, the US is a huge country, much larger than the UK, but even in the UK, you might decide to say, well, tell you what, let's train up some volunteers to then go out into the various regions to cascade this. But then, if it's been going 20 years and it's been successful, then maybe this is the right way to do it. But certainly, it seems like a very interesting and very worthwhile thing to do.
Well, I think it's very worthwhile doing. And as I said, the only problem with if you send people out, I think sometimes you have to take people away from the work environment and sit them down, isolate them so they can pay attention to what's going on. The downside of that is, and I have to mention this, I attended a Roden Swartz lecture, a series of lectures, about a month ago, just after I got back from the States. It was free. And do you know what? It was really, really interesting. But 40%, I would estimate 40% of the people that booked to do this and booked to turn up didn't. And that means that Roden Swartz had booked probably a much bigger room they needed. They catered for 40% more people than they needed and all that sort of thing. And, we've got to get past the apathy in all things. If people book to do it, then they do really need to turn up to these events. And that's what I'll say on that one. Otherwise, I'll get more and more stroppy and get letters in about me being a stroppy person.
Grumpy.
Grumpy, yeah. Yeah, but it does annoy me, Leslie, when people do things and other people just can't be bothered. Yeah.
Agree with you 100%, Martin. How can you possibly organise an event when something like that happens?
So anyway, let's not labour on that one. Second news story, and Frank might not be with us in person, but it was part of something he's been working on with the amateur radio in Canada people. And it says, do hams still listen to shortwave radio? Well, they do in Canada, according to Frank. So, I'm going to go. Leslie, do you want to go first on this one?
Why not? Yeah, we did have a long chat with Frank on this. And I know in the UK we're going to more things like online, internet, dare I say it, podcasts, that type of thing. But there are parts of the world that still use shortwave, and it's still essential to them. Yes, and it's not going to go away overnight. So, and they're talking about the national survey on how many Canadian hams in 2001 were still using it. They're at 78% from their membership. So it's still very, very active. Now, I did also notice on Facebook groups, there's specialist groups that although they use the HF, the shortwave bands, that they're like AM Society and others as well, but they specialise in some particular aspect of shortwave. So it's not dead by a long way, and it's still being used.
Yeah, it certainly is. And the other thing is, while you were talking, I was sitting here thinking, for big countries, massive companies like the States, Russia, Canada, Australia, these big, China, the big areas, if you've got a shortwave radio station and you set your antenna up as an MVIS, your signal goes up and it comes down in a radius of about 600 to 900 mile radius. That's certainly going to have, and it will drop into valleys and all sorts of things. So that's certainly going to help get your population some information off the radio.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yes, I think this is talking about that. Does listening to commercial shortwave radio stations is like a gateway drug into amateur radio? And I don't know. In my case, it wasn't. Commercial shortwave radio station isn't something I particularly do. obviously I can do. I've got the equipment, but that wasn't what got me into amateur radio. That I kind of came in by a bit of a different route. But I know for some people, and certainly reading this report from the SWLing website, suggests that it is something that it is a way for some people to do it. And obviously the Canadians are talking about the fact that they're something that's certainly a route in for them to get into amateur radio. But apart from that, Martin, I've not really got much else to say on this one.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be very naughty and say, if I remember right, your entry into amateur radio was you with your friend Mike and Mark, his brother Mark, having a few beers, realising Morse had finished, and Mike said, we should do this, and you probably all came along, because the three of you came along to my foundation course.
It kind of was. I mean, prior to that, both Mike and I had both been involved with CB radio as teenagers, and obviously that's many years ago now. So we tried CB radio out, and we were doing a bit of a road trip somewhere. I thought, let's go out. We got jobs now. Let's go and buy some CB, and realised just actually you're doing illegal. Using a 4 watt FM CB radio with a fairly inefficient aerial, as you have to do given the frequency involved, just how poor the range was. So that's when we Mike certainly started investigating the World Amateur Radio, and look where we are now.
From that point on, you cannot be cured. That's it.
Absolutely.
You're done.
Yes.
Yeah, true. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
This is really good. This is a survey that Frank helped the Radio Amateurs of Canada run back in 2021. Frank points out in here that this is a voluntary response sample and not a probability survey. For those that do survey instruments, that's an important distinction. So you can't say every amateur, in Canada, almost 30% of them listen to shortwave. But however, of the folks that replied to the survey, 28.8% of them said that they listen to shortwave at least once a month.
It's an indication.
It's right. It's an indication, but it's not definitive. But at the same time, it's information that you can use as you're building like organizational goals and that kind of stuff to get more information on that and see how you can tie this in to other parts of the hobby. But the part that, Frank has out there, which is, he has on his hotel, foxmikehotel.com, and we'll have a link on that from the ICQ.com website. But more people that replied to the survey listen to shortwave in a typical month more than they do QRP operations, which that hurts, man. QRP is like the best. And this is where I get into the whole tribalism stuff. I'm in that QRPHF group because of, and we'll talk about this in our next story, but overall there is a lot of information to be gleaned from this survey, and Frank's still processing a lot of this stuff. And I think we're going to have a really interesting and clear picture of modern Canadian amateur radio activity. And then they'll be able to rerun this survey in the future and see how stuff changes over time. So this is a very fascinating overall topic, aside from just the whole shortwave listening part. Just the whole idea of taking a population of amateur radio operators and getting some information as to what they're doing with the hobby. Very, very fascinating stuff on his website about it.
It certainly is. And as I say, all we can do is keep an eye on this. It gives us some interesting insights, as you all said. So that's a good one. All right, moving to our next news story. YLs ascend summits to be queens of the mountains. Now, for those of you who are new to the hobby, a YL, young ladies, or a group of young ladies, it's a short abbreviation, Morse for young lady. But this is great. I'm sure if Karen was on, she'd have sent me this news story. It's nice that there are young ladies out there doing things. I know there are various organisations for them. But isn't it nice just to know that, it does actually happen and it's not all old men? Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a good one. This seems to be a kind of a coordinated SOTA activation. So a number of young ladies went out onto the mountains and hills. And it says a few dozen young ladies went out around the US and possibly around the world, and they were activating summits. And I think the idea was to try to make some summit-to-summit QSOs. I think you get extra points. I'm not sure now. I think extra points if you get a summit-to-summit QSO. It's certainly nice if you're on a summit to actually work somebody else on another summit if you're doing SOTA. So great idea to kind of promote it, and a good reason to get out and about. Just say that some of the activators faced heavy rain, mud, poison ivy, and vehicle breakdowns. So it's not always easy, but it's certainly satisfying when you manage to make those contacts and activate and get them in your log when you're doing SOTA. So well done to these ladies, and hopefully they'll continue. If they aren't already regular SOTA operators, then hopefully they'll go on and get some of the awards that they can for that. I know that Ed will be probably sitting at home listening to this now saying, I want to be on this one, because Ed's obviously our big SOTA operator of the group. I'm sure he'll be very supportive of this initiative.
Yeah, certainly I think so, Chris. I think you're dead right on that. But it is good. It's good. Bill, it happened in your part of the world, so what do you think?
Yeah, I thought this is great. Unfortunately for the ladies that did this weekend, it was a challenging HF condition day on, I think it was the 8th, was the challenging day of the weekend. We were kind of wiped out on some of the bands. However, they did coordinate it. They did go on the hill. They did activate. It looks like they did get some summit to summit. I don't believe it's worth any more points. I'd have to look it up again. But either way, it's activity, and I'm very happy to do that. I did not hear them. I did have that stuff in my ham alert to try to work them as a chaser, but I was unable to hear any of them at the time. So it was all over the country and stuff. But like I said, when I was around and got the alerts, it was a challenging HF day. But I hope they do this again. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, so do I. And the other thing is, when you go out and do SOTA, summits on the air, or POTA, parks on the air, or Worldwide Fauna and Flora, then you get out and you go out and meet the public, and you get out in the nice fresh air and you play radio, usually in a quiet location. So I think this has everything going for it. What do you think, Leslie?
Well, Martin, I've done my time in the past when I started off in radio and learning about bits and pieces. And we had, shall we say, what's the phrase, challenging conditions. Oh, dear. Now I'm a lot more soft, and I can be found in the back of a Land Rover or something with a big flask of coffee and a nice hot pie. So I'm a lot more soft this day. I look after myself, and I try and avoid the, shall we say, the challenges. But we have got one coming up, a field day with the Silverthorn Club in August, and as is usual with UK bank holidays, it's actually, as soon as I touch my tent, it's going to guarantee to rain. So I look forward to that immensely. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all. It's great to get out on one thing or another. So that's all going well for them. Now, our next news story, I kind of like this, but I don't quite know how they're going to do it. We half tried to discuss this before recording. The US military to improve tracking of hobbyist balloons. So, we don't want them shooting them down thinking they're spy balloons, do we, guys? So, Leslie, you have spent time in the military, not recently, I know. But
no, many years ago.
So what do you think?
I think this should be treated exactly the same way. There used to be something in our license, and I'm going back a long time ago, and it's possibly changed, that if you were within so many meters, and I'm sure there's people in the background will jump up and down with the relevant license conditions, but if you were within a certain distance in an airfield, you had to contact them and just let them know in writing. And we did have, many years ago, we did have one in Chingford, because there's a helicopter site, and the chairman sent the relevant letter to the helicopter site, and this helicopter come over, and we were playing with balloons and stuff, And the pilot came over rather irate, and we said, yeah, but we put a letter in, and the letter was actually on the notice board in this building, so they didn't see it. So that was rather unfortunate, and shall we say the feathers were unruffled. So when he realised what happened, we all sort of profusely apologised, and we shall we say, smoothed everything over. But I think that's that could be the answer. Just let them know what you're doing. They're going to be a bit twitchy if things go flying over their base. So you don't do things like that, guys. It's just not really on. Just let them know. And I'm sure there's some mechanism whereby they can say, when the system works, they can say, no, okay, we know they're doing it. That's fine. Leave the guys alone. And I think that's when it works. That's the way forward. Over to you.
Yeah, we'll let the people know. Now, just as going off this tangent, as we often do, I remember when I first came into the hobby, early 2000s, Wimbledon Club, a club in South London, I'm not sure if they still exist, used to have their campsite at the back of Chessington many, many moons ago. And I remember one year they were flying a kite antenna, and they had this kite antenna up, and it wasn't up particularly high, but it was up. And the police helicopter came in and landed at the bottom of the field and came across and said, you got to take that down, mate. Of course, obviously you do, but they weren't doing anything they shouldn't, and it wasn't up above, but complaints had been raised. So there you go. Right, Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, just reminded me of something that Leslie was saying there. So there is a thing called a NOTAM in aviation, Notice to Airmen, which of course should really be Notice to Airmen and Airwomen, but it's a bit of an old term. NOTAMs are published by the relevant authorities. So in the case of the UK, it's the CIA, I think it's the FAA in the States, and that they basically coordinate any notices that pilots need to know about. So if there's any cranes operating or parachute jumps happening or balloon launches happening, then NOTAMs are how pilots are informed about those activities, and they're supposed to read them before they go out and fly, so they're fully briefed on what's going on. So I don't quite know how you get, I presume you have to go and write to or contact or phone up or email, or there's some sort of form. Not sure. There must be a way of talking to your authorities to get yourself on that list.
I think we did it in writing at the time.
Yeah, so really, in your example there, Leslie, it sounds like the people involved hadn't read the NOTAMs to tell them that was going on. So, their fault, really. But I can't help thinking, being a little bit cynical, that there was that story last year, I think, which we're talking about a little bit. He's mentioned the story here, that the US military did shoot down. Well, we're not sure where they came from, whether it was China or somewhere else. There was there were some balloons that were in a certain part of the States which were somewhat suspicious. And there was some suspicion that they were from some foreign states and they were there for some nefarious purposes. So I can't help thinking this actually kind of somehow relates to the fact that they're must relate to that story somehow, in the fact that they are they're taking more interest, shall we say, in these sorts of things, perhaps to keep a track on whether it's something that's an innocuous hobby balloon or whether it's coming from further afield. So it's we'll see how it goes, but it sounds like it could be quite a useful facility they're providing there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The other one I thought about was, there's a mega cost. Of course, they're going to take in serious, because every missile they fire at a tuppenny halfpenny amateur balloon in comparison to the price of their missile. I mean, these missiles must be hundreds of thousands of pounds or £100,000 plus. You fire a missile at a balloon that's worth about £50. That's not very good financials. But I do wonder, and maybe it does happen, because I don't know, but maybe this does happen. But why don't they have an international? Have a place where you register that you're flying a balloon, and you have a transponder on it, and you get the transponder from an official government agency in your country. Wouldn't that solve a lot of problems, I would have thought?
I think I think the best thing to do, I mean, I've got a friend called Tom Dawson who's into all this stuff and flying. So he's got a far, far more greater expertise than me. I think I'll ask him and see what his thoughts are.
Be interesting, Leslie. Yeah. Bill, have I opened a can of worms or thrown a hand grenade in the room on this one?
I'm not actually sure. I know currently in the States, you have to have a license to be able to fly a drone. I think you have to have it now for any drone. At one point, I think it was based on how high you went. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you probably should do the same thing for a balloon, but I actually don't know. I have to do some research on that. The one thing the article said is that they're studying numerous websites to figure out what balloons are flying over. A lot of the ones that we send up as amateur radio operators are beaconing on APRS. So, I mean, that's APRS.fi is probably your best website for that. Likewise, they're reaching out to groups. I know there's some groups, because I watch the videos on YouTube, that they'll send up a balloon every couple weeks, and they're doing measurements of the stratosphere and stuff. So that would be a good, those groups would be good to just get in contact with NORAD to make sure that they're letting know what's going on here. But I'll have to do some reading to see if I can figure out if you're supposed to have a license here in the States, because I actually don't know.
Interestingly, Bill, in the UK, and I guess it might be different in the States, it's based on certainly for drones, it's based on the weight of the drone. So I think if it's under 250 grams, then obviously that's quite small, quarter of a kilo. So what's that, about half a pound? Then it's quite liberal in terms of, the restrictions are pretty light. But as soon as you get above that and there are certain weight classes, then there are more restrictions. You have to have a license and insurance and that sort of thing, I believe. As for balloons, I'm not sure. I don't think you do, but I'm not a legal expert.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think we've opened a can of worms on this one. It'd be interesting to see what they eventually do.
And Martin, just being curious, I was just Googling what it cost to buy an air-to-air missile, and just picked a couple of random ones. An AIM-9X Sidewinder missile costs between $400,000 and $500,000 each. And there are other ones that are over $1 million each, so a massive amount of money compared to the $50 you spend on the balloon.
Oh,
yeah, and it's all coming out of your tax bill, Bill.
Yeah, that's why I'm groaning. It's like, I won't go there.
No, probably not best.
I go back to Martin. If you let people know what you're doing, and they know what you're trying to do, and you're open about it, most of the time there's not going to be a problem.
Of course it's not.
As I say at work, I'm a pacifist and a tree hugger, so none of this makes sense to me.
Right. Okay, we'll move to our next news story. And Bill, I'm giving you a little warning here. We have a claim rating. I found this news story. It wasn't an amateur radio news story, but we covered a very similar story a few months back about in the States having AM radio made mandatory, so that the AM, the medium wave broadcasts, still remain in the cars. And the headline was, would AM mandate force car makers to scrap safety features? Now, we can't repeat what we said at the beginning, but Bill, are you calm enough now?
No, this. I encourage everybody to go out to ICQpodcast.com when Colin posts this, and the article's title is "Would AM Mandate Force Car Makers to Scrap Safety Features?" I'm just going to start off with the first two sentences. Opponents play up the possibility that car makers would have to choose. If Congress requires AM radio new cars, vehicle manufacturers might have to drop safety features instead. You have to be kidding me. So what they're implying here is that in our auto industry here in America, the same people that design the safety features also design the entertainment features in the vehicle. Meanwhile, I know, because I had a friend that worked at this one place years ago, there's suppliers all over the country that make entertainment packages and to just ship that stuff to the manufacturers to put in the cars. So this sounds, see, I'm trying to keep the clean rating here, guys.
Hang on, Bill, you're okay. Go for it. There you go.
Unrealistic. How's that? How's that a good phrasing? Does that keep the clean rating okay? So I'm calling shenanigans on this one because it just doesn't pass what I call the sniff test. Does this smell fishy? This smells fishy, and I'm not sure what the problem is. Now, as I'm sitting here, stewing over this for the last 20 minutes or so, is because I knew this story was coming. I'm just sitting here trying to think: is the problem of noise on AM from electronics components the only issue here, or is there something else going on? And that's the part I don't understand. So what we got in the article doesn't make sense to me, because I think we're missing a critical piece of information from this article. And this article originally came from, what was it, Radio World, Martin?
Yeah, it was. Yes, Radio World.
Yeah. So I don't know. This just sounds odd. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I remember doing an IBM course in the mid-80s. And IBM had a acronym called FUD.
Oh, yes.
And FUD stood for Fear, Uncertainty, and Doubt. So if you put enough fear, uncertainty, and doubt in somebody's mind, don't panic.
Yes, that and the blue suits.
Yeah. So this is pure FUD. It's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You're not going to take safety issues out of cars. And I'm going to be open, and I'll be over this. I drive a 4-year-old now. It's 4 years old. Toyota Corolla. It has mega amounts of safety features on it, including forward-facing radar and, sensors all around it. Various things you can control it with. It also has an AM radio in it. One of the functions, most of the time I have the FM radio on, the FM broadcast band, VHF. It does, thank God Mr. Rothwell's not here, but it also does the digital audio broadcast, but it still has AM radio in it. So, no problems. I don't see what the problem is. Chris, what's your thoughts on it?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I think this is an absolute load. Oh, sorry, just the clean rating. Sorry, I just had to bait myself out there. What an absolute load of rubbish, basically. What? So hang on. This is an AM receiver we're putting into car, not a transmitter. It's not transmitting anything. It's what bit of an AM receiver is stopping them from putting in advanced safety features? Honestly, let's face it. Aircraft have got AM transmitters in them. They have some pretty advanced safety features. What on earth are they talking about? This is absolutely, as you were saying, Martin, just trying to play on people's fears. Why would they need to install additional shielding? I guess, okay, they might need to put it in a metal box so that it's but certainly I can't imagine how, maybe the radio may receive interference from the electronics, but I don't see how the radio is going to be causing any problems with as a receiver. Yeah, there might be a few oscillators in there, but so as you were saying, my car's 4 years old. My car's got lots and lots of safety features, and it's got an AM radio. I really, really don't see what on earth this is about. I think this is absolute codswallop. So that's my view on it, Martin.
Yeah. I think we've both been, the three of us so far have been extremely well behaved on this one. Leslie, what's your thoughts on this one?
I was laughing in the background. I was trying to find a polite word that could say what I meant, but I could. Everything's been said on this. It's hogwash.
It certainly is. It's the manufacturers trying to fight the government just because they feel like it, and they're on somebody who knows nothing about radio is now trying very hard to convince the government of something that they know nothing about, and all they've done is fired off this fear, uncertainty, and doubt, in my opinion. Now, I'll probably get 1,000,001 emails now over that one, but yeah. So I think it's this was published in a magazine, so there you go. Right, that concludes the news stories. There's only a few of us tonight, so it's a bit quicker. So those who wanted the podcast shorter, you might have got your wish this one.
Tonight's your night, yes.
Tonight's your night. Let's find out what everybody's been up to. Bill, I'm going to go to you first, just in case you have to duck out. What have you been up to?
Yep, I do actually need to duck out. I'm getting text messages from the kiddo here. Come get me. Which is good. Since the last time I was on, I worked a whole bunch of stations, a whole bunch of POTA stations, a couple of the expeditions, some soda. Got Jill again on soda and 3 ICE the one day. I actually heard her. Worked some folks on CW. Although I did have one guy, I must have sent repeat or again like 14 times because he would not turn that knob down. Once he finally turned the knob down, I got it. But man, oh man, I gotta work on my code speed. That's now on the goal list. But a couple weeks ago, I participated in FT8 poker. They had 3 rounds of it. I got in 2 rounds, and basically the idea is that you set your FT8 program to report to their website, and as you work stations, depending on how far away they are, you get random drawing of cards. So the first round, I ended up in second place. In the third round, the first round I was second place. Third round I was like 5th or 6th place. So that was kind of interesting. It was something different to do with the FT8. So I enjoyed that. Likewise, 2 Thursdays ago, I was on Kyle AA0Z stream to talk about real-time contesting adjudication. Basically, you got me, Sebastian, and Sterling together, and we talk through, what can we do to, improve HF contesting to attract more people to contesting. Because one of the issues that they kind of talked about at the contesting forum at Dayton was, average age of contesters, and there wasn't much sympathy in the room for a lot of grand changes. So, and it's really hard with everything going on with, all of us have complex work schedules now where we're working nights and weekends, especially those of us in the IT. I'm not running the data center anymore, but I'm connecting on VPN to a cloud instance in the middle of the night to do maintenance. So it's really hard to dedicate, 48 hours in a chair all weekend long in some of these major contests. So we're talking about some different ways of getting folks in for shorter periods of time, do some real-time scoring so people know, contest ends at, midnight Zulu time, aka UTC. Within a minute or two, you know how you did. Decide if you want to do a contest next weekend instead of waiting for a publishing schedule to come out. It was a good talk. And, please let Colin know I wore the company colors. So, because it was video and I do have a face for radio, but I made sure I wore the company colors to wave the flag. Likewise, that's the major stuff. I missed some beautiful DX window opportunities in the last week. There was a lot of nice activity, but even though I have lightning protection set up and I have, grounding and the polyphaser and all this other crazy stuff I've put in over the years, I still unplug during lightning storms. And I've had storm after storm after storm after storm. So I've been unplugged. So I missed some stuff in the last few days, including some beautiful DX openings on 15 meters. I was sitting there watching the cluster going, oh man, when was the storm going to be over? But I've been keeping busy and keeping active. And that's my updates for this month.
Well, it certainly sounds like you're enjoying yourself, Bill, which is the important thing. And as I say, keep on operating. I know you enjoy contesting. I'm not a big contester. I get involved with the odd one now and again, but not necessarily my bag. Leslie, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Oh, well, apart from recovering from various things, Martin, the first thing we done was the Chingford Village Festival, which we had a bit of rain there, but overall, I think it was a success. We had plenty of people there, and we told people about the hobby and what the club does, the Silverthorne Radio Club, and I think we've got a couple of people that are interested and are going to come up on a Friday. We had the local MP turned up and did a photo session, which was really great. A bit of publicity, why not, they say. So that was a great day. Certain things we learned and how to do it better next time. But overall, I think it was well worthwhile. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get some members in. Now, the other one, which is coming up this Friday, is I've had this planned for a long while, is a talk on cable losses. So there's an American YouTube video which I've adapted for UK use and various other bits of information to make it easier. And I'm going to give that talk on Friday to the local club. And fingers crossed, I hope that goes well. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah. Well, shame your talk is going to be there before the release, because you could have maybe got some other people in the area down to your club to see it.
Yeah.
And if you feel like it at a later date, and I'm not putting you under any other pressure, but if you want to do it as a chat feature, I'm sure we'd love to run it.
It does include a steak hammer and a can of Coca-Cola.
That's fine. I've known you long enough to know that it might also involve dunking pork pies into beer, but
well, it's what we do is we show a decent piece of cable, and then we say, well, this is one we smashed up earlier. Yeah. And you can actually see the measurements, meters on either end, and you can see the losses and what it does. And hey, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, which is interesting, obviously. Right, Chris, what have you been up to since we last spoke on the radio?
Not a massive amount of radio. Since coming back from the States, I have been on my travels again. So I was over at the Le Mans race circuit, well, over in France for a week, culminating in the Le Mans 24-hour race last weekend. So, no, weekend before. So, not a massive amount of time to operate the radio. I don't think I've even actually switched on my HF radio since I've been back from Dayton, which is a bit of a shame. Interestingly, on that trip, I did take with me my DMR radio and my hotspot. I did try to make a couple of contacts on the talk group. Unfortunately, nobody around at the time, so I didn't manage to work from France in the talk group, which is a bit of a shame. I also got a radio in the camper van as well, because we took the camper van over to France for a week, and we took the ferry from Dover to Calais, and then on the way back, obviously back from Calais to Dover, and we were actually booked on, I think it was something like the 6:05 ferry on a Monday evening a week or so ago. And because of all the other cars going, because Le Mans is obviously a massive event, there's something like 300,000 people attending that, quite a few Brits. There was quite a lot of traffic at the ferry port. And when we arrived at Calais, the guy said, well, actually, you might be booked on the 6:05 ferry. We're actually going to go on the 7:30 ferry, because to get through all the other checks you've got to go through with passports and things, we're going to take you 2 hours. So while we were waiting to go through, I have my radio on scan, and it's got the PMR 446, which is similar to the FRS frequency. So the license-free frequencies program in memories just to listen. And there was some quite humorous other folks that were in the queue for the various ferries going back to the UK, back to Dover from France, from Calais. Some quite interesting conversations, none of which are probably repeatable on the podcast, but there was quite interesting conversations about people pushing in the queue, people wanting to go to the toilet, people that were hungry, people that were tired, and clearly people using PMR 446 in kind of convoys. And I think there were a few convoys of cars heading back home, sort of mates driving different cars together, and they were using PMR 446 to communicate between the cars. It was quite interesting to listen to them, because actually there were probably about 4 or 5 different channels in use at the same time, listening at Calais there. So that was quite interesting. While I was in Le Mans, so I took with me as well a Quansheng UVK5 radio, which is a very popular radio now, very cheap to buy, especially if you buy one directly from China. And I've got a few of these now. We took some over as well to Dayton. And one of the reasons I took one of them just in my bag that I was carrying around was to be able to listen to the Radio Le Mans. So they actually transmit the commentary not only over tannoy but also over radio. They have an FM broadcast transmitter at Le Mans for people that are nearby, so they can listen in and hear what's going on. Unfortunately, that particular Quansheng, and it may be because I've updated the firmware and customized it a bit, the FM broadcast receiver is absolutely hopeless to the point where it's actually really unusable. Now, since coming home, I have been playing with a stock Quansheng UVK5 radio, so without any of the firmware being played around with. And actually, that broadcast receiver works actually fine. So it must have been something to do with the updated firmware that I put on there, which made that it really wasn't working very well at all. It was almost like there was some missing filters or something, or it was the wrong bandwidth or something, but didn't work very well. So that was kind of again to do with my trip to France. And then literally 2 days after returning back from my trip to France, Martin and I did a talk on our trip to Dayton. So we did a talk at the Radio Club all about, we got up to not only actually at Dayton, but also on the way there and on the way back and everything in between. So the various other places we went to. So that was kind of everything for me, Martin, radio related for the last few weeks.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I know we spoke about the Quansheng, and I hadn't heard you'd tried it on another one. It worked okay. The ones I had here that hadn't had any modification to the software worked out perfectly okay. So might be just something that was done for another reason. Right, what have I been up to? Well, I don't do a lot of HF operation, but I've been out and done a few. I was out the other Saturday for an hour and a half, worked a few stations, thoroughly enjoyed that. Not done as much on the VHF, UHF or 4 meters, and the talk group's been a bit quiet. I do see people blip it and then say nothing, and I think, well, do I call them back, or do they just want to be left alone? So if you don't put a call through, you don't get answered. But a little bit quiet. Did have a long conversation with my friend Phil down in Western Australia, a VK6 ADF. He was on the other week, and we had a long one. We'll probably have another long one next week, I would guess. What else? Oh, I fixed one of Carol's garden lights. They just corroded inside, and the battery corroded terminal. And it was a strange one to get at, but I managed to get it to work for her, so that's did. I fixed a little transistor radio that wasn't working. I've rewired a microphone for Edmund, which I promised to do months ago, but I actually done it now. And it says, I had a strange fault, which some of you might be interested in. I have a digital multimeter, an auto-ranging one. Now, it wasn't a cheap one, but the guy gave it to me because he didn't understand what it was, and did I want it because he knew I used them. And it's a nice little meter. It's not my favourite, but it works. It's a multi-ranging one. But it wouldn't measure voltage. And the resistance was a bit strange on it, and one thing or another. So I'm looking at the display, thinking, well, the battery warning light should come on. If the battery's stuff, the battery warning light should come on. But that's the most likely thing. Take the batteries out, and their little treble A's, and I measured them on my Avo Minor, which is a analog meter, 10,000 ohm per volt. So it's putting on the 3 volt range, it's putting about 30k across these resistors. Not a huge current draw, but if there's any problem with them, it would have dropped the voltage a little bit. Both batteries perfectly okay, measuring 1.5 volts. But as a last resort, I replaced the batteries, and the thing started working again. So no idea why. Maybe something strange with them. Maybe in the chemistry, I don't know. But they wouldn't. The batteries in there just wouldn't work with the auto ranging. So strange one. Sometimes it's not always obvious. I've ordered some bits for a couple of projects I'm making, so might tell you more about that when it happens. And last but not least, my daughter turned up a week ago, and she goes to air shows with her boyfriend, and she said, Dad, all these people have got these radios and they listen to what's going on at the air shows. I'm like, yeah. So she said, I've looked up scanners and they're like £200 plus. She said, I don't really want to pay that amount of money for one. I don't do that much. Surely there's a better way of doing it. Little thought on my part, we ended up buying her a Quansheng UV K5. Now, you say, well, she can't transmit because she hasn't got a license. Correct. So I go online on YouTube and there's a video that says you can turn off all the transmit. You just hold down the couple of keys and you go into the secret menu and you turn the transmit off. And its menu's like 65, I think it is, off memory. And the current radios don't have menu 65. They don't go above 54 or something. So in the end, I took the radio apart and unsoldered the lead to the PTT switch. There's like a separate board where the PTT switch is on, and the link over to the motherboard is just a solder link. So I unsoldered that. So she can't put it into transmit.
Job done.
Job done, yeah. And she's got a scanner, not the fastest scanner in the world, but she's got a scanner that will work. And dual watch, so you can put 2 frequencies in at an air show if that's all that's happening. And less than £20. And the thing arrived from China in 1 week. So impressed I was. So that's what I've been up to. And as I say, a lot of fun. All that's left me to do now is to thank you guys for turning up, and we'll move on to the next part of the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B, if you're still with us.
Yes, thank you, Martin. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, cheers, Bill. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH.
Yeah, cheers, Martin. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. And Mr. Leslie Butterfield, M0CIB.
Thanks for having me on, Martin.
It's always fun, guys. Right, 73s, and we'll catch you all another day. 73s.
73.
Cheerio.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BLY. Just a couple of news stories this episode, as we're the weekend of Friedrichshafen. And first off is the Meme Appreciation Month on the air, which is aimed at creating joy and cheer to all good little hams on the RF spectrum, aimed particularly at younger hams and, as I say, having fun with memes, etc. So the event is currently ongoing. It's going to be going through to August the 15th across all megahertz, and awards are available and, as I say, are available there for any operators there. So this started back a couple of years ago with the first Meme Appreciation Month, and since then has grown, I say, to have some extra call signs and extra bits and pieces as well, including some quite interesting play on words as well. So I say, certainly one to check out if you want to bring people into the hobby of amateur radio in a very meme generated way. This could be a great way for you to get involved from there. July brings us the IARU HF Championship contest. Will be taking place on the weekend of the 13th and 14th of July. Great opportunity for clubs and individuals to get involved. This year there's a new challenge. The RSGB Contest Committee has introduced this challenge to encourage single individual stations to work the GR2 HQ station on each band mode slot. You'll be able to submit your log, including QSOs, to the contest robots, and as they get your award and your points from there. So we'll put links to this event on the ICQ podcast webpage for you. The RSGB also let us know the fact that RSGB members and subscribers to the Radcom magazine can also find full information on the rules, etc. for this challenge in the June edition. Right, now we're going to head over to our features episode, and this episode's feature is Beginner's Fault Finding. As always, hope you enjoy.
Now for this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Audio for this feature was recorded while Dan and I were in Dayton. Unfortunately, Dan and I sat in what we thought was the quiet room while everybody else was packing up in the house that we rented. So therefore there's a little bit of background noise. But I don't think it detracts totally from the feature. And this is just possibly one of many we may do, talking about fault finding and tribal knowledge. So without further ado, let's start the feature. So as a feature, guys, Dan and I threatened to sit down and have a chat about some of the tribal knowledge we have. You know, the tribal knowledge I have in the UK, the tribal knowledge Dan has. And we thought we'd do it at Dayton because it's great fun to sit down rather than do it across the internet. Don't you agree, Dan?
Oh, this is great. We've had a great time here, and I think you'll enjoy this feature.
So, you've been an engineer and worked in lots of industries.
And have been a ham a long time.
And a ham a long time. And some of the things that you and I know that the youngsters look at us a bit strange at the time. And I remember you saying, when the articles you've written, things like, you and I sometimes think people will call us out for saying silly things, but some of this knowledge is never passed on, is it?
No, and that, you know, that's the beauty of ham radio, because we do things in ham radio, right? We don't just, you know, play with computers and play with computer design. We actually get our hands dirty in the equipment. And it's that knowledge which is really important to get systems working.
Yeah.
And to fix things.
Yeah. Well, I look at a number of YouTube videos, and there's some people doing some really interesting things. And then I cringe terribly and think, they don't know how to solder.
Yep, that's one thing.
And you see them with a big dob of solder on a soldering iron and blop. And you're thinking, that's not soldering, that's flicking solder.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
The other thing which is important is, like, if you're come across something that's not working properly, is what are the steps you need to do to fix the thing? And I have what I call I'll either call it the Romanchik's theory on electronic fixing electronic problems, or KB6NU's theory, depending on what audience I'm talking to. But my theory is that 80% of all electronic failures, at least 80%, are caused by bad connections or poor cables or such as that. And so what I tell people is always look for the cables first. Make sure the cables are inserted in the right sockets. Make sure that they're making good connection in the sockets and all that. It's amazing how many problems I think you can fix by just looking at the connections and cables.
Yeah. Well, classic example on the cables. I've had a failed cable coming out to the States. Now, guys, we live in a throwaway society, which bugs me intensely. But my headphones have gone intermittent. I can't hear anything in the right channel. A little bit of easy fault finding and waggling the cable and waggling the plug. I found that there's a broken cable fairly close to the 3.5mm jack. To me, I'm going to cut that 3.5mm jack off and install a new one for a few pennies. But most people will throw the headset away.
Yeah.
Landfill, waste of resource for something that's cheap. Now, it's not me being mean that I'm not going out to buy a new set of headphones, but these are perfectly acceptable.
Right. And you know, if you have the ability to fix it, I'm not talking about just you, Martin, but our listeners, you know, like if you have most people won't do this because they don't have a soldering iron, right?
Yeah.
Because you'll need a soldering iron to solder but if you have that capability at home, well, if somebody's got this problem with their headphones, you can either fix it for them, or they might just give them to you, and then you've got yourself a new set of headphones.
Yeah,
You know,
that happens.
Yeah.
Somebody who says,
Yeah.
I don't want this anymore, it's not that good, or it
Yeah.
doesn't work very well. A very, very short fix, and it's laughing. You're
Yeah.
laughing.
yeah,
I do a talk every now and again for clubs on fault finding. And one of the things I say to people is you've got to start off at a certain level. But the most important is you've got to be safe in your own mind that you're okay to do these things.
yeah,
So I wouldn't suggest you start ripping anything that's on 120 volts apart or 240 volts or whatever it is. But if something's on 9 volts or 12 volt battery power, you're not going to get injured. And
normally, except
normally, yeah. Okay, I know transmitters, there's a lot more on the RF and things like that. But there's certain ways of doing it. If you take something apart, if something's broken and you take it apart and you can't fix it, you will have learnt from that.
right.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. You've got to learn something. You might break the first one, taking it apart, but the next one somebody asks you to do, or if you have to do it again, you know how to get it apart. The other thing is, and you were saying about cables,
Yeah.
the other thing I say to people is, have a good look round.
Right,
Yeah?
right,
Open it up, you've got 2 eyes. Have a good look.
right. You might see a resistor that looks discolored.
Yeah.
Then not only look but smell too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Look, smell. But the other thing is that people often beaten before they start.
Yeah,
I can't fix it. If you've got the attitude of you can't fix it, you're never going to fix it, even if it's something simple.
and getting back to my theory, since 80% of the problems are cable or connection related,
Yeah.
I mean everybody can, see things that are related, and sometimes it's a very easy fix. I'll give you an example of that. One time, a friend of mine gave me a 2-meter radio. Mm-hmm. He says, "Oh, Dan, this thing's totally dead." He says, "Do you want it?" I said, "Oh, sure." So I took it home, opened it up, and there was a ribbon cable that connected the front panel to the main board, and somehow that connector had managed to work its way off.
Yeah.
So you can see that. I saw that immediately. I plugged it back in, and I had a radio.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is that, don't get beaten. I mean, little silly things like that are often, as you say, that's what fixes it.
Yeah.
And I sort of show simple ways of testing things. There's a silly LCD displays, and I remember probably about 20 years ago buying 2 LCD meters with Duff displays, and I bought them for, well, the terminology in the States is penny on the dollar, so I bought them in the UK. Yeah. They were literally being thrown away and they were brand new in the box, the works, but some of the segments didn't come up on the LCD.
Yeah.
Well, if you know what you're doing, you take them apart, you clean the edge connector to the glass, you clean the edge connector on the rubber, the conductive rubber that goes from the PCB, and you clean the connector on the PCB. What you don't do is put your grubby fingers on any of that, because the oil from your fingers messes the connection up. So you keep it nice and clean, rub it down without rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and then reassemble it. And I had 2 good meters, of which one I gave to my dad, and I had the other one. Really top-class meters that were being thrown away.
I had exactly the same experience. I had, it was a Fluke meter, really very high-quality meter. Had it for a long time, and the display started going bad. And that's all I did, too. I took it apart, took the little LCD off, and cleaned them, and everything's working great again.
Yeah, but I wonder how many people have thrown things away like that.
I know, it just kills me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not being mean. It's you're not wasting resource by throwing it in the landfill and all these sort of things. But the satisfaction when you fix something, there's a buzz.
Yeah. Especially when it's a simple fix.
Yeah. I was even better if it's a difficult fix, but we're not talking about difficult fixes today.
No.
But little things like and tribal knowledge, for argument's sake, even down to screwdrivers.
Yeah.
Now, you look at, say, a Yaesu 817 or an Icon, whatever, and you look at these crosshead screws on it, and you think, they're just Phillips screws. They're not. They're Japanese industry stand screws. The pitch is slightly different. All right, you can open them with a set of Phillips, and be careful if you do. But if you've seen the heads all screwed up and manked up, it's usually because somebody's used the wrong screwdriver.
Yeah.
And the Phillips, the Japanese industry screwdrivers, which don't cost very much, make it so much easier taking Japanese stuff apart.
Yeah.
And we're not only talking radio, it could be a Japanese car or whatever.
Computer.
Computer.
There's some special little weird screwdrivers you need to open up some Apple equipment.
Yeah. And I know people start getting a bit clever with various size Torx and the security screws. But you're not always going to come across that. And the deeper you get into fixing this stuff, and as your ability to fix things improves, you can invest in this sort of stuff, but you don't need it to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times has something been thrown away because the fuse in the plug's blown?
Yeah. That's something to check. And what is a fuse blown? It's a connection that you're not making.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, recently I've been caught out a couple of times by the fuse didn't blow, it went high resistance.
Yeah.
And now that's a very exceptional, and because I was using a digital voltmeter, which draws very little current, it was actually showing me I had 12 volts the far side of the fuse, and it wasn't until I put the device on load that it dropped, and I ended up dropping 6 volts across the fuse.
And
you're thinking, why? Now, in all the years I've been doing this sort of thing, I wouldn't have thought the fuse would go high resistance.
Yeah, because it doesn't happen that often.
It doesn't happen that often. The other thing is, I would always suggest people, don't rely on your eyesight for checking fuses. Sometimes you can look at the glass fuse and go, that's there.
But it's not. It's just broken and you just can't see it.
Yeah, or it's broken inside the metal bit at the end, which you just can't see.
Especially like you and I, we're not spring chickens anymore, and our eyesight may not be that good.
Yeah. Now, equally, if you're going to do a lot of bits and pieces, you talk about eyesight. Great tool to get, and they don't cost that much, is one of these magnifying rings. But get one with a daylight bulb. Yeah, if you've got a daylight bulb with magnification at any age, it's going to certainly help your ability, isn't it?
And I think even if you're not working on surface mount boards or things where the components are very small, those magnifying lights are really useful even for normal through hole boards.
Yeah, and it allows you to sort of double check your work.
Right.
And make sure your shoulder joints are good and things like that.
Let's get back just for a second to the power issue. That's really the first rule is make sure the power's on, right?
Yeah.
and I'll give you a story about that. So one of my first jobs, I was given the task to troubleshoot a piece of test equipment, and to give credit where it was due, the previous technician who worked on it, he was very busy and he didn't have a lot of time. So I'm not trying to diss this guy, but they'd sort of given up on it because again he was real busy, and so they said, well, we're going to put this engineer on it, let him figure it out. Well, the first thing I did was to make sure that the power leads were connected securely to the power supply. So I got, and this was a fairly high current situations. They were big cables and they big lug nuts on the power supply. So the first thing I did was crank those nuts down, and sure enough, everything worked fine. So it was a very simple solution to a very, it was a very expensive tester, but make sure the power's on. That's the key.
Yeah, it's the KISS principle, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
And another thing I'd probably throw into that is don't try and fault find something when you get emotional about it.
Oh.
If you're trying to do something, if something goes wrong,
step away for a bit.
Yeah, step away. Maybe even for 24 hours if you can afford it.
Yeah.
And come back, more relaxed and go, let's think about it.
Yeah.
And that...
Because a lot of times, I think your subconscious works on it. And you figure it out even subconsciously sometimes, right?
Yeah. But if you dive in straight, you can put more force on it.
And you and I have both done that, right? We've not taken our own advice here and just gotten more worked up about it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I remember doing my lecture on fault finding, and this is maybe something that you guys are listening to Dan and I having a chat will take away. I sat there and one of the slides is that the killer oscilloscope.
Yeah.
And how an oscilloscope kills circuit boards.
Yeah.
And there was a very senior guy who writes a lot of the RSGB books, was in the audience, and he stood up ready to pick an argument with me, and I said, just stand a minute, I'll explain why. And the reason is, if you got your oscilloscope set to AC, not DC, when you put your probe on something, there's a capacitor in the probe. So if you're measuring around, say, a 50 volt line, bits and pieces, and you're checking the signal on a 50 volt line, the voltage is there 50 volts, if you then say, I'll have a look around these logic circuits, these TTLs, that capacitor's still charged up. It discharges through your TTL device, which is only supposed to have 5 volts across it. There's a fair chance you blow the hell out of that. You've now got two faults. You had your original fault and a blown chip.
Yeah.
So easy to do. The way around it is, when you're making measurements with AC, you make the measurement on the AC range on a probe, and then you ground the probe before you make the next measurement. Just touch it on the chassis. It's not a rocket science here. And you make the next measurement. I mean, it's not something that's obvious to people, but it's so easy to put more faults on if you're rushing to do something without thinking.
Yeah, or if you're, especially now with surface mount devices, right? Everything's a lot smaller. You just have to be very careful about probing the circuit. Yeah.
I mean, I've even made recently special probes, and probes don't have to be mega. I've got two sewing needles, really sharp bits and pieces, soldered a wire to them. The other end of the wire's got plugs on it, and I've put heat shrink down over the thing, and you hold the heat shrink. Now, they're not going to be perfect for everything,
but good enough for ham work.
You might have a bit of a capacitance on it because you got it across your fingers. You might have a bit of resistance there. But if you're trying to put your probe on something that's really, really small, a homemade with a sewing needle and a sharp point is much more use to you than some of these big probes you get when you buy your multimeter. I mean, you buy a multimeter, they give you probes, but they're generic probes. They're not necessarily what you need.
Well, to get back to our theme of connections, that's actually a good point. Is if you have a multimeter, make sure you have a good set of test probes, right? Yeah. Because if you have the cheaper ones, they can develop problems in the connectors, or the wires just aren't up to the task. They can't carry enough current or whatever it is. Be careful about those test probes and leads.
How many of these multimeters do they sell? And current rating. Then you can measure 10 amps or 20 amps, and you look at the leads, and you and I would look at these and go, no way, Jose.
Yeah.
If you're drawing that sort of current, and remember, one of the things people don't necessarily think about is your copper wire has resistance.
Yeah.
That's why when we have our rigs, we have thick cable going to it so that it doesn't burn up.
And the voltage drop across them is as low as possible. Yeah.
And the other thing is, some of these meters say you can measure up to 600 volts or 1,000 volts. I look at these probes and I think, I'm damn sure I'm not going to hold those on 1,000 volt line, because I can't believe it'd be safe.
Yeah. No, you and me both.
Yeah.
In fact, I make a point of that in my tech classes to point that out. I'll hold up one of those cheap meters and say, yeah, it says 1,000 volts on the back, but look, I'm not going to do over 50 volts with this meter.
Yeah. Well, there's a saying in the UK: there are old electricians and there are bold electricians, but there aren't many old, bold electricians around.
Yeah.
You've got to be safe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we mentioned this at the start. You've got to be safe in your ability. Yeah? Dan and I are not telling you to go out there and do this. We're giving you advice if you fancy having a go at it. And you've got to weigh up whether you feel you're confident enough to do it. There's some great books around, but actually doing some of this stuff, you learn more from it, don't you?
Right, and so be careful, but don't be too afraid of it either, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's good to jump in there because you'll learn something, but you know, be safe. You know, it's sort of the two sides of this coin.
Yeah. And I mean, the other one is very, very silly. The number of people who try and measure, say, a LED, light emitting diode, with a multimeter. Well, if you try and do it on the low range, there won't be enough voltage to turn the thing on, so the LED's going to look and do stuff. Some multimeters on the higher ranges will put enough volts across to turn it on, some won't.
Yeah. They'll have an actual diode function. And if you look at the selection switch, you'll see a little diode symbol. That's the one you want to use.
We use that for normal diodes because you've got to, it effectively shows the voltage across the diode, 0.6. For an LED, different colour LEDs strike at different voltages. One of the easiest ones I use for testing LEDs is I have a 9-volt battery, and in series with one of the leads I have a 2K2 resistor. Now, I'm not doing the maths, this is nothing clever. You know, a 2K2 will drop enough volts and limit the current enough that you could put anywhere between 9 and 25 volts and you get away with it. But you light the LED up.
Yeah.
And, all right, a red one might light at, say, 1.7 volts across it, and a blue one might light at 3 volts across it. I can't remember exactly the voltages. But this stupid little one resistor gives you so much ability to check things.
Yeah.
And if you don't realise some of the basic stuff, the breakout voltage levels that you need to do things, then very easy, you can throw all your LEDs away. Some guy at the rally sold me all these LEDs and they're rubbish. It happens. But,
well.
Anyway, I think Dan and I will probably do another one of these at some point in time. We don't want to cloud your brain too much, but it's been great, isn't it, Dan? Yeah. So, okay, just a few from Dan sitting in the armchair, Dan and I sitting in the armchair, chewing the fat and passing on some tribal knowledge. I hope you guys enjoy this.
Me too.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, everybody, I really hope that you enjoyed our feature on beginner fault finding, and a great conversation had there between yourself, Dad, and Dan. And as I say, as always with those features, there will always be some little gem and nuggets, which I'm sure people will enjoy. So drop us a line and let us know your thoughts of anything that you might have learned from that feature. Now, talking about drop us a line, we always really do appreciate your feedback, and more than anything else, we do really enjoy generating debate and conversation. And just to prove the fact that it's not just positive feedback that we, publicise and take on board, we really do appreciate your critique and your, your viewpoints, which can sometimes be in difference from yourself. So with that in mind, James Barton, K5 Juliet Tango Bravo, in contact us. It says, appreciate your podcast, listen to it regularly. No way do you want to stop comment anything you find relevant and think your listeners should hear about. Well, thanks a lot to James, because as I say, we want everybody to take on board. But he's taken up with us as a conversation in relation to the Worldwide Flora and Fauna group removing parks in disputed and conflict regions in Crimea. Now, James says he agrees it's a shame, but seems like you disapproved of the delisting of these entities based on the fact that taking land by force and killing innocent civilians are merely political issues, and Ham should ignore these occurrences in order to keep WWF participant logs from being disrupted. So he's basically, obviously, he said that obviously that's his viewpoint on that. I think this is a complicated one. I fully appreciate, James, and accept that you have a right to your opinion. And I think it was Winston Churchill that famously said, I'll fight for your freedom to give you that opinion. But as I say, open for discussion. And I really think this comes down to a few points. Obviously, aggression in the world, we don't like it, and it's obviously. I'm going to talk personally here, and you chip in, Dad, at the end to let me know your thoughts. Obviously, it's not good, and obviously the issues that are going on currently in the Ukraine-Russian conflicts, and be it be in Gaza, be it be Israel, and the Palestinian conflicts and other conflicts around the world, are all not positive along those from there. Setting that aside just for a second, is that we are coming to a stage where sports and these types of things have always claimed to be non-political, but seem to be becoming more and more political over a period of time. And I suppose the question being is whether or not we judge these things on a political basis or keep them as their individual entities that they are. As an ex-sportsperson of decent standing, I would suggest I always wanted to compete against the very best and necessarily wouldn't think of the political side of things from a sporting point of view. And also don't believe that all people from a country are bad people. And I suppose that's where you come from with the logic of keeping political things separate from what's going on in the world. But I also do fully appreciate that some people do think they should be wrapped up together. And I don't know what the right answer is, but what I do know is the fact that we should obviously appreciate our freedom to have these opinions, and obviously to be able to express them. And you do express, James, your viewpoint very clearly and passionately, and etc. And it should be respected. So again, I don't know what the right answer is on this one. I'm sure it might be one of the ones that is a 50-50 one, but it's I suppose it's complicated. It's complicated, and James, I know the guys on what was the Swiss guys that we spoke to last year in Friedrichshafen, when they were talking about the DX entity awards couldn't be achieved easily anymore because of a lot of countries are delisted because of these various conflicts, and I think that's where it then crosses over into a whole complicated region of different things, and maybe something for us to think about as a hobby and as sporting organisation, etc. How we repair awards and certification, etc. in the event of political situations.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, Colin, and I agree with James that he has a good opinion. The idea is, as long as we don't fall out, James, that's the important thing. I, like Colin, would like to see amateur radio kept separately from politics. I mean, amateur radio, we're supposed to develop international friendship and work with each other. And for the most of it, we do. The other thing is that at the level of what's going on in one or other of these countries, we only get told what the media want us to hear. So, unfortunately, I've tried to stick away from a lot of the politics as much as possible and say, I'm an amateur radio operator. If I've got the chance to work the Crimea, I want to work them. I'm sure the person would talk to me as another radio amateur. It's just a shame that every now and again politics comes in and things have to get messed up a bit. Now, it doesn't mean to say I don't care about what's happening to the people out there. I certainly do. But that's to me, that's different to the amateur radio bit. And I try very hard to keep them separate and not to bring them together. So, yeah, once again, we don't try and upset anybody on this podcast. And James, you've got a different view to me. But in fairness, I respect you for it. Back to you, Colin.
Yeah, James, I really do appreciate your feedback, and please, continue to enjoy the show. And really do appreciate your feedback there, and feel free to comment and say and let us know, obviously, if you your thoughts on it, and everyone else as well. Now, in relation to Walt Washburn, KT0 Delta, got in contact with us, and this is in relation to the ARRL cyber security incident we covered in the last couple of episodes. So, kindly gives us some positive feedback, and Walt's also a very kind donor to the show as well. So, your support is greatly appreciated. However, as I say, I think we've probably got caught out a little bit here, Walt, in relation to the group that had that story in episode 432 wasn't probably our strongest IT background. Of groups of people there. So as he says, he mentions, well, we didn't really comment upon why the IRRL's silence is unhelpful, and that really, we need to be, talking more about protections in place. And it probably was a bit sort of vague in some of those bits from there. He says he understands that the ARRL must cooperate with law enforcement and complete the messy task of restoration, fix the vulnerabilities, etc., and validate the integrity and confidentiality of data. However, each step in the process needn't be serial, as he's impatient as anybody evaluate a logbook of the world and sort of getting that colossal database back online, etc. So I think on this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to you as well on this one and see if you've got any background in this area as well, because as I say, it'd be interesting to get a bit more feedback for you. I'm also going to reach out to my colleagues Chris and Bill. They don't know this yet, but I'm going to reach out to them as well. And what we might do is we might do a feature on cybersecurity data and amateur radio, and particularly look at the essences of clubs and data and databases, etc., and how this works from there. I know from a European perspective, and I'm going into my world here as an IT consultant here, is that there is a lot of worry about privacy laws. In Europe, we have GDPR, etc. There's a lot of heavy fines, and as I say, a lot of associated risk with this type of attack. And there is a lot of calling people in, etc. in that process. And you are pretty much told to not really publicize a lot of information in that process. I understand California has just brought in laws similar to GDPR as well, which again could have affected that from there. And the other thing as well, if the ARRL are probably too vocal too early, it may open them up to either a long period of auditing by data privacy teams, or B, open them up to a large substantial fines, which obviously is a catch-22, because those fines comes ARRL coffers, which obviously comes from membership fees, etc., along the lines from there. So I think we're going to do some more work on this area here. We do have some IT experts in the group. We can go into this more thoroughly. I do think, Walter, in one respects, we probably got caught with the wrong team getting that second part of the news story when it was, I think the first time round, it was still very raw and very assumed it was a cyber attack. And the second team that actually got that news story it'd be fair to say are not the strongest on maybe the IT cyber world, and it's just unfortunate that team got this area. But I think what we will do, Dad, and we'll maybe do it for the next episode. I haven't said this to you yet, and we might have to actually hold it for another one, because then one we could have something else coming in. But I think the next couple of episodes, I think we should do a piece on cyber and cyber security and data in an amateur radio world, because I do think there is some lessons to be learned from this, and some precautions, etc., that we need to think about, not just from our governing bodies, but from our clubs and as individual hams, about how we can protect each other in our community in a cyber sensitive world.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, and yes, thank you, Walt, for your email into us. I was on that team, the less technical. I did work in IT for a long period of time. Well past retirement age now, unfortunately. That doesn't mean to say I'm not interested in all this sort of stuff. I think what happened is, and you guys, we come up with some news stories. Let me explain how we do this. We come up with a news story, and it was about the ARRL, which was still having problems. And in fairness, we discussed as a group before we actually recorded that piece that was there any mileage in giving the ARRL another kicking? They'd had a bit of a kicking 2 weeks earlier. They were starting to bring things back online. Now, I know we all want to know exactly what happened, and I don't believe we'll ever find out, truthfully. But I didn't see the and the team on with me in the end didn't see the mileage in giving the ARRL another kicking on something they'd already taken from us and just about everybody else in the world. The idea I think we were trying to say is, yeah, they've had a problem and things are starting to happen. And I believe that it may not be up at the moment, but certainly Logbook of the World's been up. According to Bill Barnes, when I spoke to him the other day, has actually been up and working as well. So at one point in time. So they're not fully fixed the problem, Colin. But from my point of view and the team I had with me, we decided it wasn't worth just giving the the ARRL a good kick in again. So back to you.
Yeah, and here's the other part of that is, to be brutally honest, as much as we have a level of frustration, etc., about them being offlining services back, etc., I'm sure that there isn't any mileage. And as you say, if we gave them a good kick in, would it be, and exposed more and more problems, would it be? And the ARRL gets a bigger fine from a regulatory point of view, etc. From that point of view, that money comes out of central coffers, it comes out of membership fees, etc. And here's the great irony about data protection laws, and I'm talking this from a European perspective, but I'm fairly sure the California one will be based on this as well. As ARRL members stroke people with details in that database, you get absolutely nothing as a payout, as compensation for a data breach. So end of the day, the regulatory people will make lots of money off the back of this. It will cost the ARRL a lot of money, even on top of doing it, whatever the remediation work is. But in essence, as an amateur radio operator that's may have data compromised by this data breach, there's no real compensation for you under well, certainly under European law, and if that, my understanding, the California law is written very close to GDPR, there's very little sort of mileage on that sort of thing. So really, then all you're left with is then the benefit of potentially, as you say, highlighting this as an even bigger problem. And trust me, the ARRL people we saw at Dayton knew they had a problem. Trust me, they knew. And as I say, from that perspective there. So, but no, I take it on board, and I think I'm going to work on that feature, Dad, and we might do it in 2 episodes' time, because I think we've got something coming in next episode anyway. So I'm going to work on the next thing. I'm going to drag Bill and Chris into it, because they're in the mix as well. We were talking about it as the 3 of us in Dayton. And I think what we'll do is we might do a feature on protecting yourself, protecting your club, and obviously what national organisations have to do in this world, and really just get people opening up to the idea of actually what you really have to do in a 2024 cyber world to protect yourself and your data on this. So we'll certainly take that on board, Walton. Thank you for spurring that idea for us. We really do appreciate that from there. Right, that means basically, guys, you can get in contact with us by all the usual methods. So we want you to get in contact with us using our usual format. So either go to icqpodcast.com, where you can send us a contact there, contact us via the pages as well on our website where our show's listed on, or failing that, I say drop us a line on social media channels and we'll pick that up and drop that in there as well. So and again, we're very open to your honest feedback as well, as I'm sure that feedback there highlights to you. As I say, we are open to all feedback, not just the slaps on the back and says how great we are, even as much as we all like them, as I say from there. Right, we're talking about looking after people there. We need to thank our donor this episode. Our donor is Phil Heckingbottom. As I say, Phil always gets in nice and early every year to wish us a happy birthday. And as I say, he sent along his very kind donation for our birthday. So thank you, Phil, for doing that for us. We really do appreciate that. And also for your very kind support as well in the ICQ Podcast digital group. So thank you, Phil, for doing that for us and keeping things active there. As I mentioned at the front of the show, July is the ICQ podcast birthday month for donations. So we really do, we need you to go to icqpodcast.com/donate and donate that, either that special birthday donation that we have for the month of July, or whatever donation level you wish to give. We've made that page even simpler now for you. So there's, a lot of opportunities for you to get involved there. And it really is important for you to consider this month, because the donations we get in this month really do cover the short months, for keeping us advert free and paying our way and producing your show for you. So we really do ask you to go along and support us there. We'd obviously like to thank the guys who took part in the news roundtable as well. So we'd like to thank Chris, Mike Zero, Tango, Charlie Hotel, Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo for taking part in the news roundtable. Many thanks there. And thanks as well again to Dan KB6 and Uniform for joining Dad in the roundtable as well. Right, Dan, I think that just about wraps up episode 433 of the ICQ podcast. Bit of a long end to the show, but certainly very valuable. And really do appreciate the feedback. Mrs. B must be rather parched for a cup of tea at this stage. So, you might even have to skip finding her a chocolate biscuit or something in the cupboard to make sure she gets a cup of tea before she dehydrates.
No, we'll make Mrs. B a cup of tea as always, and find her a goodie. Probably a chocolate biscuit actually today. So no problems at all. And let's say at least we have some honest feedback and some interesting feedback that we've covered tonight. And hopefully we haven't upset more people with our answers, but I think it's important that that's our opinion, and you other people have their opinions, and we always respect people's opinions. So, no problems, Colin. I'll say 73 to you and go and make Mrs. B a cup of tea.
Perfect. 73's all. Catch you all the fortnight's time.
73.